It was in that treacherous hour before dawn, when London's fog clings most tenaciously to her cobbled streets and gaslit corners, that the extraordinary affair began. The November mist of 1891 had settled with particular malevolence upon the narrow thoroughfares of Clerkenwell, transforming familiar landmarks into spectral suggestions and muffling the city's perpetual symphony to a whisper. In this grey margin between night's crimes and day's honest labours, where even the most vigilant constable might question the evidence of his own senses, occurred an event so singular in its impossibility that it would soon draw the attention of London's most celebrated consulting detective. Constable Alfred Withers of Z Division had walked his beat through these winding streets for 7 years, and in all that time he had regulated his rounds by the steady tick of Mr. Joshua Pendry's chronometer shop on Red Lion Court. The elderly clockmaker's establishment had become, for Withers, and indeed for much of the neighbourhood, a bastion of reliability in a district where punctuality was more aspiration than achievement. Each night, as the constable passed beneath the shop's modest sign, J. Pendry, chronometer maker and regulator to the Admiralty, he would pause to synchronize his pocket watch with the magnificent long-case clock visible through the window, its brass pendulum catching the gaslight in regular, hypnotic sweeps. On this particular morning, at precisely 26 minutes past 4 by his own timepiece, Constable Withers approached the familiar corner and immediately sensed something amiss. The customary rhythmic ticking that had always greeted him, audible even through the shop's thick glass, had been replaced by an unnatural, oppressive silence. More disturbing still, the interior lamps, which Mr. Pendry invariably extinguished by 9:30 each evening, flickered with a weak, uncertain light behind curtains that should have been drawn hours earlier. Withers pressed his face to the frosted window pane, peering through the small clear section at the bottom right. What he observed within caused him to step back in alarm and summon his colleague from the adjacent beat with urgent whistle blasts that echoed eerily through the fog-shrouded court. The discovery, a workshop frozen in time. When Sergeant Morrison arrived with a crowbar borrowed from the neighbouring baker, a man reluctantly accustomed to early hours, they forced entry through the shop's front door, which yielded with surprising ease despite its apparent security. The scene that confronted them defied immediate comprehension and would haunt both officers for years to come. Every timepiece in Joshua Pendry's workshop had stopped. From the delicate carriage clocks arranged upon velvet-lined shelves to the imposing regulators standing sentinel against the panelled walls, from the pocket watches suspended on their silver chains to the ornate mantelpieces that had marked time for London's finest families, each dial displayed the identical moment, 13 minutes past 4 o'clock. The silence was absolute, profound, and deeply unsettling. Even the great long-case clock that had served as Withers' nightly reference point stood motionless, its brass pendulum hanging like a golden tongue struck dumb. At the rear of the shop, slumped over his leather-topped workbench as though sleep had overtaken him at his labours, lay the body of Joshua Pendry himself. The 62-year-old craftsman appeared almost peaceful, his grey head resting upon his folded arms, a jeweller's loop still affixed to his right eye. His shirt sleeves were rolled back, revealing the delicate, precise hands that had served his trade for 4 decades. A velvet smoking cap lay upon the adjacent stool, and scattered across the bench were the tools of his profession. Tiny screws sorted into wooden troughs, lengths of spring steel, and a small heap of fine blue powder used by machinists to test bearing surfaces. Yet closer examination revealed details that transformed this scene of apparent natural death into something far more sinister. About Mr. Pendry's throat, barely visible beneath his collar, ran a pale crescent mark, no wider than a pencil line, but unmistakably the impression left by some form of ligature. A wire of extraordinary fineness, kinked in 3 places along its length, hung from the edge of the workbench like a spider's gossamer thread. Most puzzling of all, clutched beneath the clockmaker's lifeless hand, lay a slip of card bearing 2 words written in his careful copper plate, "Hour before dawn." The investigation, impossible circumstances. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard arrived within the hour, his sharp features betraying the mixture of professional interest and personal frustration that marked his encounters with seemingly impossible crimes. His preliminary examination revealed a locked room mystery of the most perplexing variety. The shop's windows were securely latched from within, though one sash showed signs of recent disturbance. A thin smear of lampblack along the interior sill and a peculiar gummy residue that suggested something had been applied to facilitate silent movement. The front door's locks remained undamaged, and both shop keys hung upon their customary nail behind the counter. The ledger lay open to the previous day's entries, the final notation recording payment of 3 sovereigns from R&J Bell, Wharfingers. Beside it, a fresh handbill announced the morning's Royal Mail Express to Southampton, its corner turned down in the manner of a calling card, though no name appeared upon it. Most intriguingly, in the shop's rear chamber stood an empty glass display case, its lock opened by key rather than force. According to the Admiralty representative who arrived that afternoon, a stern gentleman named Sir John Rooke, this case had contained a marine chronometer of revolutionary design, intended for trials with the Channel Fleet. The neighbors, when questioned, provided little illumination. Mr. Pendray had been a widower of exemplary habits who retired punctually each evening and rose with the dawn. His apprentice, young Owen Ledger, had departed the previous evening to tend his ailing mother in St. Luke's parish. Only one witness offered anything of substance. A carman delivering ice to nearby Hatton Garden swore he had observed a gentleman in a dark greatcoat waiting at the mouth of Red Lion Court shortly after 3 that morning, his face turned toward the chronometer shop like a cat watching a mouse hole. The consultation. Holmes enters the game. By afternoon, with the newspapers already trumpeting headlines about the mystery of stopped time and murder in Clerkenwell, Sir John Rooke found himself reluctantly ascending the 17 steps to the lodgings of Mr. Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street. The Admiralty official, a man accustomed to the orderly progression of naval affairs, discovered himself face to face with London's most unconventional consulting detective, a lean, hawk-faced individual reclining upon a sofa with apparent indifference, grey eyes half closed, a violin within easy reach. "Mr. Holmes," Sir John began, his voice carrying the crisp authority of Whitehall, "I come to you because this affair transcends ordinary criminal investigation. The missing chronometer represents months of development by our finest craftsmen, and its theft, for theft it surely is, threatens matters of national importance. Inspector Lestrade, while competent in his way, has confessed himself baffled by the circumstances." Holmes opened his eyes fully for the first time since his visitor's arrival, fixing Sir John with that penetrating stare that had unnerved countless clients and criminals alike. "Time, Sir John, is precisely what you have lost. The rest, I venture to suggest, may yet be recovered. Watson, I believe our morning's correspondence must yield to a more pressing matter. The game, as they say, is afoot." Dr. Watson, who had been observing this exchange from his chair by the window, felt the familiar thrill that accompanied the commencement of one of Holmes's investigations. The case of the stopped clocks, with its impossible circumstances and tantalizing clues, promised to challenge even his friend's extraordinary powers of deduction. As Holmes rose with that sudden, decisive energy that marked the beginning of his active involvement, Watson knew they were about to embark upon an adventure that would test the very limits of logical reasoning. The hour before dawn had indeed brought mystery to Clerkenwell, but with Sherlock Holmes now engaged, the first light of understanding was about to pierce the fog of impossibility that shrouded Joshua Pendrey's silent workshop. The particulars of the Clerkenwell affair, as relayed by Sir John Rooke in our Baker Street sitting room that grey afternoon, presented a puzzle of such singular complexity that even Holmes's habitually composed features betrayed a flicker of genuine interest. I observed my friend as he absorbed each detail with that peculiar intensity that marked the commencement of his most challenging investigations, his grey eyes never leaving our visitor's face, cataloguing not merely the spoken facts, but the manner of their delivery. "Before we proceed to Clerkenwell," Holmes said suddenly, rising from his chair with characteristic abruptness, "permit me to satisfy myself upon one or two preliminary points, Sir John. You mentioned that the missing chronometer, this meridian mark the 4, represents a revolutionary advance in marine timekeeping. I require specifics." Sir John shifted uncomfortably, clearly wrestling with official discretion. "The device incorporates a self-regulating mechanism that maintains extraordinary accuracy despite violent motion aboard ship. Traditional chronometers, while precise, require constant attention. This instrument would render such maintenance unnecessary, providing our naval forces with a considerable advantage in navigation and coordination." "Ah," Holmes murmured, his fingers steepled before him. "A timepiece valuable enough to kill for, yet requiring the services of London's most skilled chronometer maker for its final calibration. Most illuminating." He paused, his keen gaze shifting to examine something about our visitor's person with microscopic attention. "I perceive, Sir John, that you visited the scene personally before coming to us. The faint residue of Prussian blue beneath your left thumbnail, a powder used by precision instrument makers to test bearing surfaces, suggests you handled something in Pendry's workshop. What did you examine so closely?" Sir John's eyes widened in surprise. "You are quite correct, Mr. Holmes. I inspected the empty display case where the chronometer had been housed. The lock showed no signs of forcing. It had been opened with a key." Holmes's method, reading the professional mind. "Precisely what I suspected," Holmes continued, moving to the window where the afternoon light caught the sharp angles of his profile. "We are not dealing with a common thief, Watson, but with someone possessing intimate knowledge of both chronometric principles and Pendry's specific working methods. The theatrical nature of the crime, every timepiece stopped at the identical moment, the victim positioned as though peacefully at work, suggests a killer with both technical expertise and a pronounced sense of the dramatic. I found myself intrigued by this distinction. But surely, Holmes, the method was chosen for its silence. A man strangled makes no outcry. Elementary, yet incomplete, my dear fellow. Consider the elaborate nature of our criminal's work. To stop every clock in that establishment simultaneously would require either intimate knowledge of each mechanism or some common agency I do not yet perceive. This was murder as artistic statement, not merely elimination for gain." Holmes turned back to Sir John with renewed intensity. "Your chronometer, would its adjustment require specialized tools beyond those typically found in a clockmaker's workshop?" "Indeed, Mr. Holmes. The self-regulating mechanism necessitates calibration equipment of extraordinary precision, instruments that would be familiar only to the most advanced practitioners of the horological arts." "Then our investigation acquires its first concrete direction," Holmes declared, reaching for his coat. "We seek not merely a murderer and thief, but a person of considerable technical sophistication. One who possesses both the knowledge to operate advanced chronometric equipment and the theatrical sensibility to orchestrate this elaborate tableau." The game commences. Toward Clerkenwell. As we prepared to depart for Red Lion Court, Holmes paused at his writing desk to dash off 2 brief notes with characteristic rapidity. One to Lestrade, requesting he preserve the scene exactly as found and hold his hand regarding the apprentice. The other to young Wiggins, who shall discover what cargo passes through the wharves of R&J Bell, a name that appeared in Pendry's final ledger entry. Sir John looked puzzled. "You believe the river is involved?" "The Thames, Sir John, is London's oldest accomplice in matters of concealment and transport. But let us not be led by romance when facts await our examination." Holmes's eyes glinted with that familiar light that heralded the active phase of his investigations. The note clutched in Pendry's hand hour before dawn, was either the warning of a dying man or the signature of a methodical killer. We shall determine which by examining what our theatrical criminal has left for our edification. The hansom that bore us through London's fog-shrouded streets toward Clerkenwell carried with it the promise of revelation. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile etched against the shifting grey beyond the cab's windows, while I reflected upon the singular nature of a crime that had apparently made time itself an accomplice to murder. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly as we neared our destination, "prepare yourself for a workshop where silence reigns supreme and where every stopped clock may speak more eloquently than any witness. The game, as I promised, is indeed afoot." The hour before dawn had brought mystery to Clerkenwell, but with Holmes now actively engaged, I sensed that the first light of understanding was about to pierce the fog of impossibility that shrouded Joshua Pendry's silent sanctuary of time. The fog had thickened to an almost tangible presence by the time our hansom drew to a halt before Red Lion Court, transforming the narrow thoroughfare into a grey tunnel where gaslight struggled against the November gloom. Inspector Lestrade awaited us beside the chronometer shop, his lean figure hunched against the chill, his sharp features bearing that expression of professional frustration I had come to recognize whenever he encountered circumstances that defied conventional explanation. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us with evident relief, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "I've preserved everything exactly as found, though I confess the scene grows no less perplexing upon repeated examination. The constables have touched nothing beyond establishing the fact of death, and I've stationed men at both entrances to prevent contamination." Holmes acknowledged this with a curt nod before stepping through the shop's entrance, his keen eyes immediately beginning that systematic survey which marked the commencement of his most thorough investigations. The silence that greeted us was indeed profound. Not merely the absence of sound, but something more oppressive, as though the very air had been drained of its natural resonance. The stopped timepieces seemed to regard us with their frozen faces like a congregation of mute witnesses, each dial displaying that identical, impossible moment. 13 minutes past 4 o'clock. The science of systematic observation. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, moving with characteristic precision toward the nearest shelf of carriage clocks, yet not immediately touching anything. Instead, he stood motionless for a full minute, his head cocked slightly, his grey eyes traversing every inch of the workshop with that peculiar intensity that marked the preliminary phase of his investigations. "Watson, observe the uniformity of cessation, not merely similar times, but identical to the precise position of each minute hand. This suggests either simultaneous mechanical failure, which probability renders virtually impossible, or deliberate intervention by someone possessing extraordinary technical knowledge." He began his methodical examination not with the body, as might be expected, but with the periphery. Kneeling beside the front door, he ran a gloved finger along the jamb before inspecting the lock mechanism with his small lens. "No signs of tampering as reported," he observed, rising. "The key was used, or someone employed lock-picking skills of exceptional refinement. Given the other circumstances, I incline toward the former hypothesis." Moving to the shop's front window, Holmes spent several minutes examining the sash where Constable Withers had noted the lamp-black smear. "This marking was not applied by accident," he announced, his lens revealing details invisible to ordinary scrutiny. "Observe its position, not on the exterior sill where a clumsy intruder might leave it, but on the interior edge, precisely where the latch mechanism engages, and this apparent gummy residue is, in fact, a film of beeswax, applied with deliberate purpose." "Beeswax?" I inquired, peering closer at the nearly invisible substance. "To ensure silent operation, my dear fellow. Even a well-maintained window sash can produce telltale sounds during movement. Beeswax eliminates such auditory evidence." His examination revealed additional details that spoke of careful preparation. "Note also this diagonal groove in the paint. shallow but distinct. Something was drawn across this sill under tension, not straight on but at an angle, suggesting the application of force from a position to the right of the window. The impossible uniformity of time's cessation. Holmes's attention next turned to the timepieces themselves, beginning with the great long case clock that had served as Constable Withers's nightly reference. His examination was particularly thorough, the magnifying glass revealing subtleties that escaped casual observation. "Most instructive," he murmured, his lens focused upon the pendulum's suspension. Recent adjustments to the regulation, minute alterations that would escape ordinary notice but would significantly affect the clock's timekeeping. Moving systematically through the workshop, he examined each category of timepiece with scientific precision. At an angular French mantel clock, he dropped to one knee and studied the junction of its minute hand with the arbor. "Watson, observe the faint aureole of blued powder about the cannon pinion. It is fresh to that location, yet there is none upon the hour hand." "Prussian blue," I recognized, recalling Sir John's stained thumbnail. "Precisely. Used by precision instrument makers to test bearing surfaces." He rose with characteristic abruptness. "The pattern suggests these mechanisms were not simply stopped, but carefully adjusted. Each timepiece required individual attention, a process demanding both technical expertise and considerable time." The victim's final workshop. At the rear workbench where Joshua Pendry's body remained positioned, Holmes began his most detailed examination. The elderly clockmaker appeared almost peaceful in death, his grey head resting upon folded arms, the jeweler's loupe still affixed to his right eye. Yet Holmes's investigation revealed subtleties that transformed this scene of apparent tranquility into something far more sinister. "Observe the positioning carefully," Holmes instructed, his voice carrying that clinical detachment he employed when analyzing the mechanics of murder. "The victim's left hand clutches that slip of paper, hour before dawn, while his right hand rests naturally upon the bench. Yet the distribution of tools suggests he was engaged in delicate work requiring both hands when interrupted." The wire that hung from the bench's edge drew Holmes's particular attention. Its extraordinary fineness and the 3 distinct kinks along its length spoke of careful preparation rather than improvised violence. "A garrote of unusual sophistication," he observed, holding the strand to the light. "Not piano wire. Too soft for that purpose. The composition appears to be brass with a trace of tin, possibly a suspension wire repurposed from a pendulum mechanism. These kinks serve to concentrate pressure at specific points, ensuring swift elimination while leaving minimal evidence of struggle." Holmes examined the ligature mark on Pendry's throat with microscopic attention, producing his calipers to measure its width. "A trifle under 1 millimeter, he noted in his pocketbook. 3 points of deeper pressure corresponding exactly to the kinks in this wire. The application was swift and professional." The missing element and its secrets. Sir John Rooke directed our attention to the empty display case in the shop's rear chamber, where the revolutionary Meridian Mark IV chronometer had been housed. The lock showed clear evidence of having been opened with a key rather than forced, and the velvet-lined interior retained the precise impression of the missing instrument. Holmes examined the case with characteristic thoroughness, his lens revealing details that escaped ordinary observation. "The dust pattern confirms recent removal, within hours of the murder. Yet the precision of the lock's operation indicates intimate familiarity with Pendry's security arrangements." He paused, bringing his finger to his nose after running it along the case's interior edge. "Curious, a faint scent, almost imperceptible. Bitter almonds. Significant, though I cannot yet determine its precise relevance." His examination of the surrounding area proved equally revealing. "Here, Watson, a footprint in the powder beside the bench. Small boot, left foot, with a distinctive notch worn at the outer heel. The grit embedded in the sole is not London granite, but chalk with a bloom of coal dust. Coastal in origin, I should venture. The river connection emerges. Beneath the work stool, Holmes discovered a fragment of paper that proved to be the torn corner of a handbill. When I peered over his shoulder, I could discern only a partial line advertising the Royal Mail Express to Southampton. The finger that turned down this corner may have left an impression, Holmes observed, producing lampblack from a constable and performing one of those simple demonstrations that never failed to fascinate me. Using the back of a spoon, he brought out upon the writing board beneath a ghostly script the impression of some previous notation. The fragments were tantalizing. Ham 5:12 and Bell W.F. Southampton at 12 minutes past 5, I ventured. Or 5 and 12 past, if one writes as a mechanic thinks, Holmes replied. Combined with the final entry in Pendry's ledger, payment from R&J Bell, Wharfingers, we begin to perceive a connection between this workshop and the Thames. Preliminary deductions. The profile of a killer. As we prepared to depart, Holmes performed one final demonstration that left me astonished. Approaching the great long-case clock, he inserted the faintest wisp of paper between the crutch and the pendulum rod. The mechanism ceased instantly, as obedient as a trained hound. "So slight a thing," I exclaimed. "Indeed, Watson. So is the difference between a roomful of clocks that have grown silent in their own time and a roomful that have been persuaded to display a specific moment. Our criminal possesses not merely technical expertise, but a pronounced sense of the theatrical." Holmes turned to Lestrade with renewed intensity. "We seek not merely a murderer and thief, Inspector, but someone who moves within the specialized world of precision chronometry. The theatrical staging, the technical sophistication, the intimate knowledge of both the victim's habits and the location of specialized equipment. These elements point to a killer who operated from within Pendry's professional circle." The workshop's oppressive silence seemed to deepen as Holmes spoke, the stopped clocks bearing mute testimony to a crime of unprecedented complexity. As we emerged into the fog-shrouded court, I reflected that we had indeed learned much from the scene, yet the true magnitude of the puzzle was only beginning to reveal itself. The hour before dawn had brought more than murder to Clerkenwell. It had brought a challenge worthy of Sherlock Holmes's most formidable powers of deduction. The fog had begun its grudging retreat from Clerkenwell's narrow streets when we encountered the first figure who would dominate the official investigation. Owen Ledger arrived at Red Lion Court as we concluded our examination of the workshop, his pale face bearing that peculiar combination of grief and bewilderment that marks those suddenly thrust into the machinery of criminal inquiry. The young man's appearance, slight of build, with the careful hands and indoor pallor characteristic of his trade, immediately drew Inspector Lestrade's professional attention. "You are the apprentice," Lestrade announced with satisfaction, as though the youth's arrival had solved some fundamental equation. "Owen Ledger, lately in the employ of the deceased. You will accompany us for questioning." Holmes observed this exchange with characteristic detachment, his grey eyes cataloguing details that escaped more conventional scrutiny. Young Ledger's clothing, though neat, showed the telltale signs of his profession. Faint traces of Prussian blue beneath his fingernails, a shallow cut along his forefinger where a mainspring might leave its lesson, and the particular stoop of shoulders accustomed to delicate work. Yet it was the apprentice's emotional response to viewing his master's body that seemed to capture Holmes's particular interest. The apprentice's character. A study in contradictions. Our subsequent interview with Owen Ledger, conducted in the modest parlour of his lodgings in Ironmonger Row, revealed a young man of considerable complexity. Mrs. Carmichael, his landlady, spoke of him with genuine affection, describing a tenant who paid his rent punctually, studied his trade manuals by candlelight, and never caused disturbance to her other lodgers. Mr. Pendry was more than an employer to me, Ledgers explained, his voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine grief. "When my father died of the fever 6 years past, Mr. Pendry took me on, despite having no obligation. He taught me not merely the mechanics of clockwork, but what he called the soul of time, the understanding that each timepiece possesses its own character and requirements. Holmes leaned forward with that penetrating intensity that marked his most careful interrogations. This understanding you describe, did it extend to the simultaneous regulation of multiple mechanisms, the coordination of complex chronometric systems? The apprentice's confusion appeared genuine. But that would be impossible, Mr. Holmes. Each clock in the workshop operates independently. Different escapements, different regulation systems, different temperamental requirements. To stop them all at precisely the same moment would require individual adjustment of each mechanism, a process demanding hours of work and intimate knowledge of every instrument's particular characteristics. Technical expertise. The limits of apprenticeship. Holmes' examination of Ledger's technical knowledge proved particularly illuminating. The young man's room contained an impressive collection of horological texts, including advanced treatises on marine chronometry and astronomical calculation that suggested ambitions beyond ordinary clockmaking. His marginalia demonstrated not merely comprehension, but innovative thinking, revealing a mind capable of sophisticated mechanical reasoning. Yet when Holmes pressed him on the specific complexities evident at the crime scene, Ledger's limitations became apparent. The marine chronometers and astronomical regulators, he admitted, those Mr. Pendry adjusted personally. He explained that their mechanisms incorporated principles I was not yet ready to understand. My knowledge extends to the common pieces, bracket clocks, long case movements, carriage timepieces, but the truly sophisticated instruments remained beyond my experience. This admission proved crucial to Holmes's developing analysis. The crime had required not merely general horological knowledge, but specific expertise in the most advanced chronometric principles, knowledge that even a talented apprentice might not possess. The circumstantial web, evidence accumulates. Inspector Lestrade's investigation had not been idle during our character study. His men had uncovered a series of circumstantial details that, taken together, painted an increasingly damning picture of the apprentice's potential guilt. The key evidence, Lestrade announced with professional satisfaction, producing a small brass object from his pocket, was found in Ledger's possession. It opens not only the shop's rear entrance, which he would naturally possess, but also the lock on the display case where the Meridian Mark IV was housed. More damaging still was the discovery, concealed beneath a loose floorboard in Ledger's room, of a set of precision instruments that far exceeded anything an apprentice might legitimately own. The Swiss-made calipers, micrometers, and specialized adjustment keys represented several months' wages and bore the maker's mark of Kellner and Sons of Geneva, the same firm that had supplied instruments for the Admiralty's chronometer project. "Mr. Pendry gave them to me last month," Ledger stammered when confronted with this discovery, saying I had progressed sufficiently to warrant proper tools. Holmes examined the instruments with characteristic thoroughness, his lens revealing subtleties that spoke to their recent acquisition and careful maintenance. "Most generous of your master," he observed, though his tone suggested reservations about this explanation. The river connection, following the Thames. Our investigation next led us eastward to Wapping, where the name of R&J Bell opened doors with the grudging cooperation characteristic of London's river trade. The Bell brothers proved to be men of the old Thames breed, weathered faces, suspicious eyes, and that particular combination of surface civility and underlying hostility toward unnecessary inquiry. "Mr. Pendry brought us fine work," Jacob Bell confirmed, his cap twisted nervously in his hands, packed like a duchess's jewels and marked to the ounce. "We handled 2 consignments for him this past month, paid on delivery as the ledger shows." Holmes's casual inquiry about outgoing shipments produced a fractional pause that spoke volumes to the trained observer. "None since July," Jacob replied, though his eyes flickered toward a chalkboard where recent departures were recorded. Holmes noted a smear where something had been hastily erased. "The Royal Mail Express to Southampton," Holmes observed quietly. departing at 12 minutes past 5, a convenient schedule when parcels must travel ahead of questions. The brothers' exchange of glances confirmed Holmes's suspicions, though they maintained their denials with the stubborn consistency of men accustomed to official scrutiny. Physical evidence. The ferrule and the footprint. Back at the crime scene, Constable Withers produced a small object that added another thread to the web of evidence. A walking stick ferrule, nicked in 2 places, had been discovered beneath the shop counter. Its fresh appearance suggested recent loss, possibly by the mysterious gentleman in the greatcoat whom the carman had observed waiting at the court's entrance. Holmes's examination of this evidence proved characteristically revealing. "The nicks speak of regular use on London's pavements," he observed, "yet the brass shows no patina of age. A new ferrule on an old stick suggesting recent replacement or deliberate preparation." More intriguing was his comparison of the footprint found beside Pendry's workbench with Owen Ledger's boots. The print showed a distinctive notch at the outer heel, while the apprentice's footwear displayed wear at the inner. Heel, a small discrepancy that might escape casual notice but spoke eloquently to the trained observer. Holmes's growing skepticism. The theatrical element. As the circumstantial evidence against Owen Ledger accumulated, Holmes's reservations became increasingly apparent. During our return journey to Baker Street, he articulated the concerns that had been building throughout the investigation. "Consider the theatrical nature of our criminal's work, Watson," he said, his sharp profile etched against the hansom's window. "The stopped clocks, the positioned body, the cryptic message, all elements designed to create maximum dramatic impact. Would such a sophisticated mind not also consider the question of who might bear suspicion for the crime?" The evidence against the apprentice was indeed compelling. Opportunity, technical knowledge, access to specialized tools, and a master key that opened both shop and display case. Yet Holmes's analytical mind perceived flaws in this seemingly perfect construction. "The very completeness of the case troubles me," he continued. "Each piece of evidence points directly toward Ledger, yet none explains the extraordinary technical sophistication evident in the crime itself. To stop every timepiece simultaneously while leaving no trace of tampering. Such work requires not merely knowledge, but mastery of the most advanced chronometric principles." The perfect frame. Misdirection. As Art Holmes's final observation as we approached Baker Street proved particularly prescient. If our criminal possesses the theatrical sensibilities evident in the crime scene's arrangement, would he not also demonstrate similar artistry in directing suspicion toward an innocent party? The apprentice presents an ideal suspect, access, knowledge, and just enough suspicious circumstances to satisfy conventional investigation. Inspector Lestrade's confidence in the case against Owen Ledger was evident when he joined us that evening at our lodgings. "The evidence is overwhelming, Mr. Holmes," he declared, laying out his findings with professional satisfaction. "Motive, opportunity, means, and now physical evidence linking him directly to the crime. The boy will be charged tomorrow morning." Yet Holmes's expression suggested that the inspector's certainty was premature. "The obvious often conceals the truly remarkable, Lestrade," he replied quietly. "While your investigation has been thorough, I find myself drawn to the threads that do not quite align. The coastal chalk and coal dust, the technical sophistication beyond an apprentice's capabilities, the theatrical precision of the crime's execution." As night settled over London, I reflected that we had indeed discovered much about Owen Ledger's circumstances and capabilities. Yet whether these discoveries pointed toward guilt or elaborate misdirection remained to be determined. The hour before dawn had brought not merely murder to Clerkenwell, but a puzzle of such complexity that even the obvious solution might prove to be merely another layer of carefully constructed deception. The apprentice slept that night in Lestrade's custody, while the true architect of this extraordinary crime remained free to pursue whatever larger design had required Joshua Pendry's death and the theft of the Admiralty's revolutionary chronometer. Holmes's skepticism of the obvious solution suggested that our investigation had only begun to penetrate the layers of misdirection that surrounded this most theatrical of murders. The grey morning that followed Inspector Lestrade's confident pronouncements found Holmes in a mood of particular restlessness. While the inspector had departed the previous evening satisfied with his case against Owen Ledger, my friend's manner suggested that the apparent solution had only deepened his interest in the true complexities of the affair. Over our breakfast, he announced his intention to conduct one final private examination of the crime scene. "Watson," he said, folding his napkin with characteristic precision, "I find myself troubled by the very completeness of the evidence against young Ledger. When circumstances align with such mathematical perfection, one must suspect the influence of a calculating mind rather than mere chance." We arrived at Red Lion Court to find Constable Withers maintaining his lonely vigil outside the chronometer shop. The morning light, filtering through the November air with unusual clarity, seemed to transform the workshop's interior, revealing details that had escaped notice during our previous, more crowded examinations. Holmes began his investigation not with the obvious elements, the body, the empty display case, the stopped timepieces, but with what he termed the archaeology of deception. Moving with that methodical precision that marked his most thorough work, he approached each silent clock with the reverence of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. The discovery. Evidence hidden in plain sight. At the great long case regulator that had served as Constable Withers' nightly reference, Holmes dropped to one knee and examined the escapement mechanism through the glass panel. Without disturbing the case's exterior, he produced a thin strip of card and inserted it delicately between the pallets and the escape wheel. The sudden, metallic chatter that followed, 2 sharp ticks before silence resumed, caused me to start. "Fascinating," he murmured, withdrawing the card and examining it through his lens. "The mechanism functions perfectly, yet something prevented its natural operation at precisely 13 minutes past 4. He repeated this procedure at a bracket clock near the counter, coaxing from its mechanism a similar brief resurrection before silence returned. From the junction of the anchor and the wheel, he extracted with surgical precision a tiny sliver of material, so minute that it appeared as mere dust to my untrained eye. "Holmes," I protested, "surely such infinitesimal fragments cannot bear significance in a case of murder and theft." "On the contrary, Watson," he replied, placing the microscopic evidence upon a sheet of white paper. "These fragments speak more eloquently than any witness. Observe their uniformity, each cut with the same precision, each positioned with identical accuracy. This was not the work of chance, but of systematic preparation." The technical sophistication. Beyond ordinary skill, Holmes's examination revealed evidence of a technical sophistication that far exceeded anything an ordinary apprentice might possess. Each timepiece had been individually adjusted, not damaged or broken, but precisely calibrated to cease operation at the predetermined moment. The method required not merely knowledge of clockwork principles, but mastery of the most advanced chronometric techniques. From a French carriage piece, he recovered a minute wedge lodged beneath the click that arrests the ratchet. At a small regulator with a dead-beat escapement, a shaved fiber lay exactly where a thinking mind would position it to interrupt impulse without marring the mechanism's teeth. Each obstruction had been crafted from the same high-quality paper, glacé finish, distinctive watermark, edges showing the precise burr of a sharp blade drawn by a practiced hand. "Gum Arabic," Holmes observed, touching one fragment to his tongue with the delicate distaste of a connoisseur testing suspect wine. A trace of sizing, the faintest bitterness of ink. This paper bears a watermark, barely visible but sufficient for identification. We are dealing with materials of exceptional quality, Watson, not the crude implements of desperate improvisation. The chemical evidence, traces of sophistication. Holmes's attention next turned to the empty display case where the Meridian Mark IV had been housed. His examination of the interior revealed not merely the absence of the chronometer, but positive evidence of the thief's sophistication. The faint scent that had troubled him during our initial investigation now resolved itself into something more specific and alarming. "Bitter almonds," he announced quietly, his sensitive nostrils detecting what others had missed entirely. Faint but unmistakable. The signature of hydrogen cyanide? Watson. A poison that acts with deadly swiftness and leaves little trace. This discovery transformed our understanding of the crime entirely. The ligature mark on Pendry's throat, the positioning of the body, the apparent struggle, all might be elaborate misdirection designed to conceal a more sophisticated method of murder. "But Holmes," I objected. "The wire, the strangulation, surely these indicate the actual cause of death." "Or," he replied with that quiet intensity that marked his most significant deductions, "they indicate a killer sophisticated enough to employ multiple methods, one to ensure death, another to mislead investigation. A man rendered unconscious by cyanide vapor would offer no resistance to subsequent strangulation, yet the obvious evidence would point investigators toward the more dramatic but ultimately secondary cause. The larger pattern. A mind of exceptional capability. Holmes's discoveries painted a picture of criminal sophistication that extended far beyond simple theft or apprentice ambition. The simultaneous stopping of every timepiece, achieved through individual preparation of each mechanism, represented hours of meticulous work by someone possessing not merely technical knowledge, but artistic sensibilities of the highest order. "Consider the theatrical nature of our criminal's work," Holmes observed, gathering his microscopic evidence into a slim envelope. The stopped clocks, the positioned body, the cryptic message, all elements designed to create maximum dramatic impact while concealing the true sophistication of the methods employed. His examination of the window sash revealed additional evidence of careful preparation. The substance he had initially identified as beeswax proved, under chemical analysis, to be spermaceti, a far more expensive lubricant derived from whale oil processing and prized by the finest instrument makers for its exceptional properties. "Spermaceti is not readily available to ordinary clockmakers," Holmes explained, securing a sample for further analysis. "It must be specially ordered from maritime suppliers, and its cost limits its use to the most sophisticated chronometric work. Our criminal's choice of materials speaks to both technical expertise and considerable financial resources." Holmes's strategic silence. The game deepens. As we prepared to depart the silent workshop, Holmes performed one final demonstration that illustrated the true complexity of the crime. Approaching the great long-case clock, he inserted the faintest wisp of paper between the crutch and the pendulum rod. The mechanism ceased instantly, as obedient as a trained animal. "So slight a thing," I marveled, "yet it stops the clock completely." "Indeed, Watson, and therein lies the artistry of our criminal's work. To achieve such precision across an entire workshop of diverse mechanisms requires not merely technical knowledge, but an understanding of chronometric principles that approaches genius." Yet even as Holmes revealed the extraordinary sophistication behind the crime, he maintained absolute discretion regarding his discoveries. When Inspector Lestrade arrived that afternoon to inform us of Owen Ledger's formal charging, Holmes offered no contradiction to the official theory. "The evidence against the apprentice appears compelling," Holmes observed with careful neutrality, though his grey eyes suggested reservations he chose not to voice. "Youth, opportunity, and the pressure of circumstances, a familiar pattern in criminal investigation." Lestrade departed satisfied with his case, unaware that Holmes had uncovered evidence pointing toward a criminal mind of exceptional sophistication, one whose technical mastery was matched by theatrical sensibilities that transformed murder into performance art. The unseen adversary, preparing for revelation. That evening, as London's fog settled once again over the city's ancient streets, Holmes sat before our fire in contemplative silence. The evidence he had gathered, the precision-cut paper fragments, the chemical traces, the sophisticated materials, painted a picture of an adversary unlike any we had previously encountered. "Watson," he said finally, his voice carrying that quiet intensity that marked his most significant cases, "we are not dealing with a common criminal, but with someone whose technical expertise rivals the finest chronometer makers in Europe. The theatrical staging, the chemical sophistication, the intimate knowledge of both the victim's habits and the location of specialized equipment. These elements point to a mind of exceptional capability and considerable preparation." The stopped clocks of Clerkenwell had indeed spoken eloquently to those who knew how to listen. Yet their testimony revealed not the guilt of an obvious suspect, but the presence of an unseen adversary whose true identity and ultimate purpose remained shrouded in the same fog of deception that had concealed the sophisticated nature of the crime itself. The hour before dawn had brought more than murder to Red Lion Court. It had brought a challenge worthy of Sherlock Holmes's most formidable powers of deduction. And somewhere in the shadows of London's vast complexity, a criminal mind of exceptional sophistication was preparing for whatever larger design had required Joshua Pendry's death and the theft of the Admiralty's revolutionary chronometer. Holmes locked his evidence in the drawer of his desk with ceremonial precision, his manner suggesting that while others saw conclusion, he perceived only the opening moves in a game of extraordinary complexity. The true investigation, I realized, was only beginning. The grey morning that followed Owen Ledger's arrest found Holmes in a state of profound agitation that I had rarely witnessed in our long association. He paced our sitting room with the restless energy of a caged predator, his lean figure casting shifting shadows in the pale November light. The violin lay abandoned upon the mantelpiece, its strings slack and silent, a telling indication of my friend's mental turmoil. His grey eyes, usually so penetrating and focused, seemed to gaze through rather than at the familiar objects of our lodgings, as though his mind wrestled with connections visible only to his extraordinary intellect. "The very completeness of the evidence against young Ledger offends every instinct I possess," he muttered, running long fingers through his dark hair. "A criminal capable of the theatrical sophistication evident in Clerkenwell does not leave so convenient a trail for official investigation to follow. The apprentice is a carefully positioned pawn, Watson, and I confess myself irritated by the sheer audacity of the misdirection. I observed him with that familiar mixture of admiration and concern that marked the commencement of his most challenging cases." Holmes had barely touched his breakfast, and the fragments of evidence from Pendry's workshop lay arranged across our table like pieces of an intricate puzzle whose pattern remained tantalizingly obscure. Our contemplations were interrupted by the sharp rap of a telegram boy at our door. Mrs. Hudson brought the message with evident concern, her motherly instincts clearly troubled by Holmes's restless state. He tore open the envelope with characteristic abruptness, his eyes scanning the brief lines with that peculiar intensity that marked the reception of significant intelligence. "Ah," he breathed, a grim satisfaction settling upon his sharp features. "The game expands its theatre, Watson. This is from Inspector Lestrade, dispatched with considerable urgency from Wapping. It appears our theatrical criminal has provided us with a second performance. The Wapping incident, a deadly encore." The telegram's terse language conveyed information of the most disturbing nature. A second crime had occurred at the premises of R&J Bell, the wharfingers, whose name had appeared in Joshua Pendry's final ledger entry. The night watchman, one Samuel Holroyd, had been discovered dead at his post in circumstances that mirrored the Clerkenwell affair with unsettling precision. Most significantly, every timepiece within the counting-house had stopped at exactly the same moment, 13 minutes past 4 o'clock. Holmes's reaction was immediate and decisive. Hat, coat, gloves, Watson. There's not a moment to lose. Our adversary has chosen to demonstrate the scope of his capabilities, and we must examine the evidence before official investigation obscures the subtleties. The hansom that bore us through London's fog-shrouded streets toward the Thames carried with it an atmosphere of urgent purpose. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his sharp profile etched against the shifting grey beyond the cab's windows, while I reflected upon the implications of a second crime executed with such identical methodology. The silent counting house. Death by design. We arrived at the Bell Brothers wharf to find Inspector Lestrade awaiting us with an expression that mixed professional frustration with grudging recognition of Holmes's superior analytical capabilities. The fog hung thick over the Thames, transforming the familiar landscape of cranes and warehouses into a grey maze where gaslight struggled against the November gloom. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lestrade greeted us with evident relief. "I've preserved everything exactly as discovered, though I confess the circumstances grow no less perplexing upon repeated examination. The parallels to your Clerkenwell affair are too precise to be coincidental." The poor counting house presented a scene of eerie familiarity. Samuel Holroyd, a man of perhaps 50 years with the weathered features of one accustomed to river life, sat slumped at his desk as though peaceful sleep had overtaken him during his vigil. His broad face bore no expression of alarm or struggle, and his position suggested natural repose rather than violent death. Yet Holmes's examination immediately revealed the subtle signs that transformed this apparent tranquility into something far more sinister. "Observe the positioning carefully," Holmes instructed, his voice carrying that clinical detachment he employed when analyzing the mechanics of murder. "No defensive wounds. No signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry. Our criminal has refined his technique since Clerkenwell, employing the same chemical agent with greater sophistication." The faint, sweet scent that hung in the air confirmed Holmes's suspicions. The bitter almond odor of hydrogen cyanide, barely perceptible yet unmistakable to those trained to detect it, spoke of a killer who employed the most advanced methods of silent elimination. The Maritime. Precision. Stopped time on the Thames. Holmes's examination of the stopped timepieces revealed the same extraordinary technical sophistication we had encountered in Pendry's workshop. 3 brass ship's bells, each bearing the crown and anchor marking of naval service, hung silent above a tide table and a modest regulator. Every mechanism had been individually adjusted, not damaged or broken, but precisely calibrated to cease operation at the predetermined moment. "Observe the consistency of method," Holmes noted, his lens revealing microscopic details invisible to ordinary scrutiny. The same high-quality paper fragments, the same surgical precision in their placement, the same understanding of chronometric principles that approaches mastery. "We are dealing with a mind that thinks in terms of synchronized precision, Watson, one that views time itself as an instrument to be manipulated." From the ship's bells, he extracted minute slivers of the same glacé paper we had found in Clerkenwell, each cut with identical precision and positioned to interrupt the mechanism's operation without causing permanent damage. The materials were uniform in quality and preparation, suggesting systematic planning rather than improvised intervention. The chemical signature. A killer's calling card. Holmes's investigation of the counting house window revealed evidence of the same careful preparation we had observed at Pendry's shop. The interior sash bore a faint diagonal scrape above the latch, and traces of spermaceti lubricant confirmed the use of identical techniques for silent entry. "Our criminal is nothing if not consistent," Holmes observed, securing samples of the lubricant for comparison. The same materials, the same methods, the same theatrical attention to detail. Yet the sophistication of the chemical agent suggests resources and knowledge that extend far beyond ordinary criminal capabilities. The positioning of Holroyd's body, the absence of struggle, the precise timing of the chemical application, all spoke of a killer who had studied his methods with scientific precision and refined them through practical application. The river connection, following the Thames. Holmes's examination of the counting-house ledgers revealed information that connected the Bell brothers directly to the chronometer trade. Recent entries documented the receipt and forwarding of packages from Clerkenwell, marked with the careful notations characteristic of valuable cargo requiring special handling. 2 consignments received from J. Pendry, chronometer maker. Holmes read from the ledger, his finger tracing the careful copperplate entries. Both forwarded to Southampton within days of receipt. The timing suggests coordination between the theft and the transportation arrangements. More significantly, his investigation of the dock area revealed evidence of recent nocturnal activity. Fresh wheel marks in the soft earth beside the wharf, the impression of heavy cases being loaded, and traces of the same coastal chalk and coal dust we had found in Pendry's workshop painted a picture of systematic preparation and professional execution. The nautical calculation, time and tide. Holmes's attention was particularly drawn to a tide table mounted beside the stopped regulator, its margins annotated with calculations in a precise hand. The notations referenced nautical dawn at Portsmouth and Southampton, with particular attention to the timing of high water and the schedule of Royal Mail steamers. "Consider the significance of the timing, Watson," Holmes observed, consulting his pocket almanac with characteristic precision. The stopped clocks display 13 minutes past 4, precisely 1 hour before nautical dawn at Portsmouth on the night of Pendry's murder. Our criminal thinks in terms of maritime navigation, calculating his movements according to tidal schedules and celestial observations. This revelation transformed our understanding of the cryptic message found in Pendry's hand. Hour before dawn was not merely theatrical flourish, but a specific temporal reference that connected the crimes to maritime operations of considerable sophistication. Holmes's strategic realization, the larger design. As we prepared to depart the silent counting-house, Holmes performed a final demonstration that illustrated the true complexity of our adversary's methods. Approaching the stopped regulator, he carefully removed one of the paper fragments that had been inserted to interrupt its escapement. The mechanism immediately resumed its steady tick, as obedient as a trained animal responding to its master's command. So precise a thing, I marveled, yet it stops the clock completely. Indeed, Watson, and therein lies the artistry of our criminal's work. To achieve such precision across multiple locations and diverse mechanisms requires not merely technical knowledge, but an understanding of chronometric principles that approaches genius. Holmes's analysis of the evidence revealed disturbing implications that extended far beyond simple theft and murder. 2 crimes, Watson, executed with identical methodology, yet separated by geography and circumstance. The theatrical staging, the chemical sophistication, the maritime connections, all point to a coordinated campaign whose ultimate purpose remains tantalizingly obscure. The erratic energy, Holmes engages fully. The return journey to Baker Street found Holmes in that state of intense mental activity that marked his full engagement with cases of exceptional complexity. His manner alternated between profound concentration and apparent distraction, his gray eyes constantly moving as though tracking connections invisible to ordinary perception. "Consider the implications, Watson," he said as our hansom navigated the fog-shrouded streets. "A killer who moves between the quiet workshop of Clerkenwell and the busy wharves of Wapping with equal facility. Someone who possesses not merely technical expertise, but access to advanced chemical agents and knowledge of maritime schedules. We are not dealing with a common criminal, but with an adversary whose resources and capabilities suggest connections that extend to the highest levels of technical and possibly governmental circles." His restless energy manifested in abrupt commands and sudden silences. He dispatched young Wiggins with messages for the Baker Street irregulars, requesting surveillance of the Thames-side districts from Shadwell to Greenwich. He sent urgent telegrams to Southampton and Portsmouth, inquiring about recent arrivals and departures that might connect to the chronometer trade. The pattern emerges. A criminal symphony. That evening, as Holmes arranged his evidence with characteristic precision, the scope of the conspiracy began to emerge with disturbing clarity. The stolen chronometers, the murdered craftsmen, the theatrical staging designed to mislead investigation, all pointed toward a coordinated campaign whose sophistication suggested planning of considerable scope and duration. Two instruments of unprecedented accuracy, Holmes observed, his sharp features etched by firelight as he contemplated the implications. One designed for naval navigation, the other presumably for related chronometric purposes. Together, they represent capabilities that could revolutionize maritime operations or provide navigational advantages of incalculable strategic value. The cryptic messages, "hour before dawn" at Clerkenwell, and a second note found clutched in Holroyd's hand reading, "Time's river flows to sea," suggested not merely theatrical flourish, but coded communications pointing toward some larger design involving maritime operations. As London's fog settled once again over the city's ancient thoroughfares, Holmes sat in contemplative silence, his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames of our fire. The stopped clocks of Clerkenwell and Wapping had indeed spoken eloquently to those who knew how to listen, revealing not the guilt of an obvious suspect, but the presence of an unseen adversary whose true identity and ultimate purpose remained shrouded in the same fog of deception that had concealed the sophisticated nature of both crimes. The hour before dawn had brought more than murder to London. It had brought the opening movements of a criminal symphony whose full orchestration we were only beginning to comprehend. Somewhere in the shadows of the Empire's vast complexity, a mind of exceptional sophistication was conducting operations whose stakes extended far beyond the theft of timepieces, however revolutionary their capabilities might be. Holmes locked his evidence in the drawer of his desk with ceremonial precision, his manner suggesting that while others saw conclusion in Owen Ledger's arrest, he perceived only the preliminary notes of a composition whose true crescendo remained to be performed. The Thames ran silent beneath London's ancient bridges, but its waters carried secrets that would soon demand the full measure of Sherlock Holmes's extraordinary powers of deduction. The grey November morning that followed our grim discoveries at Wapping found Holmes in that state of cold, focused energy that marked the transition from analysis to action. He stood before our sitting-room window, his lean figure silhouetted against the fog-shrouded street, a telegram crumpled in his long fingers, and his grey eyes alight with the peculiar fire that accompanied his most audacious schemes. "The time for passive observation has ended, Watson," he declared, turning from the window with characteristic abruptness. "Our theatrical adversary has demonstrated his capabilities twice now, each performance more sophisticated than the last. We must force him into a third act, but this time upon a stage of our choosing." Holmes's analysis of the evidence had led him to a crucial deduction about the stolen Meridian Mark IV chronometer. Despite its revolutionary design, the instrument remained incomplete without a final calibration process that required specialized equipment found in only a handful of locations throughout Europe. The criminal's elaborate theft had secured the chronometer itself, but not the means to make it fully operational for maritime use. "Consider the implications, Watson," Holmes continued, moving to our table where the evidence from both crime scenes lay arranged with scientific precision. "The Bell brothers' ledgers show regular shipments to Southampton. The tide calculations suggest intimate knowledge of channel navigation, and the timing of both murders corresponds precisely to optimal departure windows for continental vessels. Our adversary requires not merely the chronometer, but access to the specialized calibration equipment that will render it truly valuable. The maritime deduction, understanding the criminal's need. Holmes's examination of the technical literature surrounding the Meridian Mark IV revealed the instrument's single critical weakness. Its self-regulating mechanism, while revolutionary in concept, required adjustment using a unique calibration apparatus that existed in only 3 locations: the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, the Hydrographic Office at Portsmouth, and the private workshop of Herr Wilhelm Brenner, a renowned German chronometer maker who maintained a discreet establishment in Southampton's maritime district. The Greenwich and Portsmouth facilities are too well guarded, too public for our criminals' methods, Holmes observed, consulting a maritime directory with the attention of a seasoned navigator. But Brenner's workshop, a private establishment serving the merchant marine and occasional naval contracts, presents precisely the combination of technical capability and accessible security that would appeal to a mind that thinks in terms of theatrical precision. The revelation transformed Holmes's understanding of the criminal's ultimate objective. The thefts, the murders, the elaborate staging, all were preliminary moves in a larger game whose true prize was not merely the chronometer itself, but the completed, fully operational instrument that could provide navigational advantages of incalculable strategic value. The trap, a web of calculated deception. Holmes's strategy involved an elaborate deception that exploited what he believed to be the criminal's greatest vulnerability: the necessity of completing the chronometer's calibration before it could fulfill its intended purpose. Working through channels that remained diplomatically obscure, Holmes arranged for word to circulate within London's specialized maritime community that Herr Brenner had agreed to perform an emergency calibration for a mysterious client, scheduled for the early morning hours, when discretion could be assured. The false intelligence was disseminated with characteristic precision. A conversation overheard at Lloyd's Coffee House, a memorandum deliberately misfiled at the Admiralty, a technical discussion at the Royal Institution. Each piece of information was calculated to reach the specialized community where our criminal moved, yet appear sufficiently confidential to suggest genuine value. Our adversary's theatrical sensibilities work against him now, Holmes explained, his sharp features animated by the prospect of turning the criminal's own methods to our advantage. A mind that stages murders as dramatic performances will be irresistibly drawn to the opportunity of completing his masterpiece under the very noses of those who seek to apprehend him. The Southampton Gambit, bait and surveillance. Holmes's preparations required a return to the Bell Brothers' wharf, where the maritime connections that had drawn our adversary twice before would serve as the stage for his final performance. The counting house, scene of Samuel Holroyd's murder, was prepared with the same meticulous attention to detail that had marked the criminal's own theatrical staging. A specially prepared chronometer case, outwardly identical to those used for the most valuable instruments, but containing a clever mechanism of Holmes's own devising, was positioned prominently upon the desk where Holroyd had met his death. The case's brass fittings had been treated with a chemical solution that would leave invisible traces upon any hand that touched them, creating evidence that no amount of subsequent washing could entirely remove. "The beauty of the trap, Watson," Holmes observed, adjusting the case's position with surgical precision, "lies not in its complexity but in its inevitability. Our criminal must verify the chronometer's presence before arranging its transport to Southampton. The very thoroughness that has marked his previous operations compels him to examine the prize personally." Holmes's surveillance arrangements involved the Baker Street irregulars deployed in an intricate network throughout the Thameside districts. Young Wiggins coordinated teams of sharp-eyed street Arabs who could move through London's fog-shrouded streets with the invisibility of urban wildlife, their reports providing real-time intelligence about any unusual activity in the maritime quarter. The chemical countermeasures. Neutralizing sophistication, Holmes's most careful preparations involved countermeasures against the chemical agents that had proven so effective in the previous murders. Working in consultation with Professor Challenger, a gentleman whose expertise in exotic chemistry rivaled his reputation for explosive temperament, Holmes prepared protective measures designed to neutralize the effects of hydrogen cyanide. The counting house was equipped with concealed ventilation systems that could rapidly clear the air of chemical agents. Holmes himself carried a small vial of amyl nitrite, a compound known to counteract cyanide poisoning if administered promptly. His costume included a specially prepared handkerchief treated with chemicals that would provide temporary protection against inhaled toxins. Our adversary's greatest advantage has been the swift, silent nature of his chemical methods, Holmes explained, testing the effectiveness of his protective measures. By neutralizing that advantage, we force him to rely upon conventional violence, a realm where preparation and numbers favor the defender. The Vigil. Waiting in the hour before dawn. The night Holmes chose for his strategic play was one of particularly dense fog, transforming the Thames into a grey tunnel where gaslight struggled against the November gloom. We positioned ourselves in the Bell Brothers warehouse, with clear sight lines to both the counting house and the river approaches that had served our adversary's previous operations. Holmes had transformed himself with characteristic thoroughness, the rough clothing of a Thames waterman, a false beard that altered the line of his jaw, and the particular slouch of shoulders accustomed to heavy labor. I wore the modest attire of a night clerk, my medical bag serving as both prop and practical necessity should Holmes's chemical countermeasures prove insufficient. "He will come in the hour before dawn," Holmes whispered, his voice carrying the rough accent of his assumed character. "For that is when the fog lies thickest and the river's tides are most favorable for silent approach. The timing that marked his previous performances becomes the signature that betrays his presence." The criminal's approach. Theatrical precision. The first sign of our adversary's presence came not as sight or sound, but as that peculiar alteration in the atmosphere that marks the approach of exceptional intelligence. The fog seemed to thicken around the counting house, and the familiar sounds of the river night, the lap of water against pilings, the distant cry of night birds, took on a quality of expectant silence. Then, with the precision that had marked his previous performances, our criminal materialized from the grey obscurity of the Thames-side night. He moved with the fluid grace of one accustomed to silent approach, his dark greatcoat seeming to absorb rather than reflect the faint gaslight. The soft felt hat that shadowed his features and the scarf drawn high across his face could not entirely conceal the aristocratic bearing that spoke of education and refinement. "Observe the hands, Watson," Holmes breathed, his voice barely audible above the whisper of fog against the warehouse walls. Long, delicate, with the squared nails of a precision craftsman. This is no common criminal, but a man whose technical expertise approaches artistry. The figure paused at the counting-house window, his movements betraying that intimate familiarity with the location that had enabled his previous success. The application of spermaceti to the window latch, the careful manipulation of the sash to avoid any sound that might alert potential observers. Each action demonstrated the theatrical precision that had transformed murder into performance art. The moment of truth. When time stands still. As our adversary entered the counting house through the window he had prepared with characteristic thoroughness, Holmes made his final preparations for the confrontation that would determine the success or failure of his elaborate stratagem. The chemical countermeasures were activated, the surveillance network alerted, and the trap prepared to close around a criminal mind whose sophistication had challenged even Holmes's formidable powers of deduction. The figure moved directly to the prepared chronometer case, his gloved hands hovering over the brass fittings with the reverence of a connoisseur examining a masterpiece. In that moment, the chemical solution Holmes had applied to the metal began its invisible work, creating evidence that would survive any attempt at concealment. "The hour before dawn," Holmes murmured, his voice carrying across the fog-shrouded counting house with quiet authority. has indeed brought our theatrical friend to his final performance. The criminal's head turned with predatory alertness, his eyes searching the shadows for the source of the voice that had shattered the silence of his carefully orchestrated approach. The game that had begun with stopped clocks in Clerkenwell was about to reach its climax in the grey hour before dawn, when time itself would finally serve the cause of justice rather than the artistry of murder. Holmes rose from concealment with that fluid grace that marked his most decisive moments, and I knew that the master's web was about to close around the most sophisticated criminal adversary we had ever encountered. The Thames ran silent beneath London's ancient bridges, but its waters would soon carry the resolution of a mystery that had challenged the very foundations of logical deduction. The silence that followed Holmes's quiet declaration stretched taut as a violin string, broken only by the Thames lapping against the wharf and the distant cry of gulls navigating London's fog-shrouded morning. The figure beside the chronometer case stood motionless, his gloved hands still poised above the brass fittings, yet something in his posture had shifted. A subtle alteration that spoke of a mind rapidly calculating new possibilities in the face of unexpected opposition. "Mr. Holmes," came the voice from beneath the turned-up collar, cultured and controlled despite the circumstances. "I confess myself both surprised and impressed, though I suspect your trap was laid with rather more precision than mere chance would allow." Holmes stepped fully into the gaslight, abandoning his waterman's disguise with characteristic decisiveness. "Indeed it was, Sir John. Your theatrical sensibilities, while admirable in their sophistication, have proven as predictable as the tides you calculate with such precision." The figure straightened slowly, removing hat and scarf with movements that retained their aristocratic grace even in defeat. The face thus revealed, sharp-featured, intelligent, bearing the unmistakable stamp of authority, belonged to Sir John Rooke of Her Majesty's Admiralty, the very gentleman who had first engaged our services in this extraordinary affair. "Sir John Rooke," I breathed, my voice barely audible above the whisper of fog against the counting-house windows. The implication struck me with the force of a physical blow. Our client, the representative of the Crown's interests, revealed as the architect of the very crimes we had been engaged to solve. The web of deception unraveled. Authority corrupted. Holmes observed our former client with that penetrating intensity that marked his most complete analytical triumphs. "The very completeness of your deception, sir, John, speaks to a mind of exceptional capability. To position yourself as the injured party, to direct official investigation toward convenient scapegoats, to manipulate the machinery of justice itself in service of criminal enterprise. Such audacity requires not merely intelligence, but a profound understanding of institutional psychology." Sir John's expression revealed neither shame nor defiance, but rather the philosophical acceptance of a chess master whose elaborate gambit had finally encountered a superior strategist. "Your reputation, Mr. Holmes, falls considerably short of the reality. I had calculated the probability of detection at less than 15%, even accounting for your involvement. Clearly, my mathematical models require revision." "Your greatest error," Holmes continued, moving closer with predatory grace, "lay in underestimating the very qualities that made you valuable to the Admiralty. Your intimate knowledge of chronometric principles, your access to advanced chemical agents, your understanding of maritime schedules. These advantages became signatures that pointed inexorably toward their source." Holmes began his systematic exposition with the methodical precision that had made him London's most celebrated consulting detective. The hydrogen cyanide employed in both murders required not merely access to exotic chemicals, but intimate knowledge of their properties and physiological effects. Your position at the Admiralty provided both the means and the expertise necessary for such sophisticated applications. The technical mastery, science in service of murder. The simultaneous stopping of every timepiece in both locations, Holmes explained, producing his lens to examine the evidence Sir John had left upon the prepared chronometer case, represented the work of someone whose understanding of chronometric principles approaches mastery. Each mechanism was individually adjusted, not damaged or broken, but precisely calibrated to cease operation at the predetermined moment of 13 minutes past 4. Holmes extracted from his pocket several of the microscopic paper fragments he had recovered from both crime scenes. Glacé paper of exceptional quality, each fragment cut with surgical precision and positioned to interrupt chronometric operation without permanent damage. The watermark, barely visible but unmistakable, bears the anchor and crown of Admiralty stationery. Your own visiting card, Sir John, provided the materials for your theatrical staging. Sir John's eyes flickered with what might have been professional admiration. The technical challenges were considerable, Mr. Holmes, but not insurmountable for one whose naval service included responsibility for the most advanced chronometric instruments in Her Majesty's fleet. The precision required was well within my capabilities. Yet your most sophisticated touch, Holmes continued, was the chemical component of your murders, the bitter almond scent that troubled me at both crime scenes spoke of cyanide preparation that required laboratory-grade materials and scientific precision. Pendray and Holroyd were rendered unconscious by carefully calculated doses of hydrogen cyanide before the theatrical ligatures were applied to mislead subsequent investigation. The Maritime Network. Connections revealed. Holmes's investigation had uncovered the full scope of Sir John's conspiracy, revealing a network that extended throughout London's maritime community and beyond. Your position at the Admiralty provided not merely technical knowledge, but access to the specialized community where such instruments find their ultimate value. The Bell Brothers Wharf served as your conduit to continental buyers whose identity remains diplomatically obscure, but whose willingness to pay for navigational advantages is well documented. The tide calculations found at both crime scenes, the timing of the murders to correspond with optimal shipping schedules, the coastal chalk and coal dust that spoke of regular travel between London and Channel ports, all pointed toward a conspiracy whose scope extended far beyond simple theft. The Meridian Mark IV chronometer, Holmes observed, consulting technical diagrams he had obtained through channels that remained diplomatically obscure, represents more than revolutionary timekeeping. In the hands of a foreign naval power, such instruments could provide strategic advantages in both commercial and military applications. Your access to the instrument's specifications, combined with your knowledge of its calibration requirements, made you uniquely positioned to exploit its strategic value. The motive. Patriotism perverted. Sir John's explanation, when it came, revealed the complex motivations that had driven a distinguished public servant to murder and treason. The Admiralty, Mr. Holmes, is an institution bound by tradition and hampered by bureaucratic timidity. Revolutionary innovations languish in committee while lesser nations advance their maritime capabilities. If commercial incentives can accelerate British naval development, then commerce serves the Crown's ultimate interests. His voice carried the conviction of one who had rationalized betrayal as patriotic duty. The buyers I cultivated, certain gentlemen upon the continent, understood the chronometer's strategic value in ways that our own naval establishment could not. The proceeds from its sale would fund further development of British chronometric capabilities while demonstrating to our enemies the futility of challenging our maritime supremacy. Holmes' expression revealed neither sympathy nor condemnation, merely the clinical interest of one examining a particularly complex specimen. Yet murder, Sir John, serves no patriotic purpose. Pendray and Holroyd died not for crown or country, but to conceal your betrayal of the trust placed in your hands. The chemical evidence, the trap springs closed. Holmes's final demonstration revealed the trap that had ensnared even Sir John's sophisticated planning. The brass chronometer case, prepared with a chemical solution that would leave invisible traces upon any hand that touched it, had performed its function with scientific precision. "Silver nitrate," Holmes explained, producing a small vial and applying 3 drops to the case's brass fittings. A faint grey bloom arose and vanished, but the chemical reaction had been recorded. Harmless upon the metal, yet indelible upon skin for hours after contact. Inspector Lestrade, who had positioned himself at the counting-house entrance with characteristic efficiency, stepped forward with professional satisfaction. "Sir John Rooke, I arrest you for the murders of Joshua Pendry and Samuel Holroyd, and for the theft of instruments belonging to Her Majesty's naval service." Sir John submitted to arrest with the dignity of one accustomed to command. Yet his eyes remained fixed upon Holmes with a mixture of professional admiration and personal regret. "Your methods, Mr. Holmes, demonstrate a precision that rivals the instruments I sought to exploit. I confess myself honored to have been defeated by such extraordinary analytical capabilities." The aftermath. Justice and reflection. As the constables secured their distinguished prisoner, Holmes performed one final examination of the evidence that had led to this moment of revelation. The stopped clocks, the chemical traces, the theatrical staging that had transformed murder into performance art, all had yielded their secrets to systematic analysis and logical deduction. "The hour before dawn," Holmes observed quietly, "has indeed brought our theatrical friend to his final performance. Yet the implications of this affair extend far beyond the fog-shrouded streets of London. The corruption of institutional authority, the perversion of scientific knowledge in service of criminal enterprise, the transformations of patriotic duty into treasonous betrayal. These elements speak to challenges that transcend individual criminal investigation." Young Wiggins appeared from the warehouse shadows, his report confirming the scope of Sir John's preparations. "2 of 'em took a lighter from Bell's Stairs, sir, but our lads marked 'em both. And word from Southampton. Foreign packet delayed. Cargo manifest under surveillance." Holmes nodded with satisfaction. The network extends beyond our immediate grasp, but its principal architect stands revealed. The chronometer trade, like time itself, keeps its own counsel, yet justice, when properly applied, maintains a precision that rivals the finest mechanical instruments. Watson's reflection, the genius of evil revealed. As we prepared to depart the silent counting-house, I reflected upon the extraordinary complexity of the case that had challenged even Holmes's formidable powers of deduction. The theatrical staging, the chemical sophistication, the systematic misdirection toward innocent suspects, all had been orchestrated by a mind whose technical expertise was matched by a profound understanding of human psychology and institutional behavior. "Holmes," I said as we emerged into the fog-shrouded court, "the implications of this affair trouble me deeply. If men of Sir John's position and capabilities can be corrupted to such purposes, what safeguards exist against similar betrayals?" Holmes paused at the warehouse entrance, his sharp profile etched against the shifting grey of the Thames-side morning. "The safeguards, Watson, lie not in institutions but in individuals, in the dedication of men like Pendry and Holroyd, who died serving honest purposes, and in the persistent application of logical analysis to the detection of deception, however sophisticated its presentation." The stopped clocks of Clerkenwell and Wapping had finally resumed their steady tick, marking the passage of time with mechanical precision. Yet the case of the hour before dawn had demonstrated that time itself could be manipulated by minds of sufficient sophistication, transformed from natural phenomenon into instrument of deception and theatrical staging. Sir John Rooke's arrest marked not merely the conclusion of our investigation, but the revelation of a conspiracy whose scope had challenged the very foundations of institutional trust. The Thames ran silent beneath London's ancient bridges, but its waters had finally yielded the secrets that had transformed Her Majesty's most trusted servants into the architects of theatrical murder. Holmes locked the evidence of our triumph in his dispatch case with ceremonial precision, his manner suggesting that while this particular game had reached its conclusion, the larger questions it raised about authority, trust, and the corruption of exceptional intelligence would continue to challenge those who sought to maintain the delicate balance between order and chaos in an increasingly complex world. The hour before dawn had brought more than murder to London. It had brought the sobering recognition that the greatest threats to justice often arise not from the criminal classes, but from the corruption of those entrusted with its protection. Yet it had also demonstrated that systematic analysis and logical deduction, properly applied, could penetrate even the most sophisticated deceptions and restore the natural order that mechanical precision and human integrity were meant to serve. The grey November morning that witnessed Sir John Rooke's arrest brought with it a transformation that extended far beyond the fog-shrouded wharves of Wapping. Within hours of the Admiralty officials' removal in Lestrade's custody, the machinery of governmental discretion began its careful work. Men in frock coats and measured voices appeared at Scotland Yard. Memoranda passed whose phrases were barbed with diplomatic necessity, and the newspapers that had trumpeted the mystery of stopped time now spoke with studied restraint of Admiralty irregularities. Holmes observed these institutional maneuvers with characteristic detachment, his attention focused not upon public consequence, but upon the exactitude of proof. "The structure must bear weight without theatrical flourish, Watson," he remarked, arranging the final pieces of evidence upon our table with scientific precision. "If it cannot, it remains mere stage scenery rather than architecture." Inspector Lestrade, bearing himself with admirable squareness despite the delicate political implications, ensured that justice followed its proper course. "We'll have no shadow cast upon young Ledger," he declared with professional satisfaction. "The evidence against Sir John is overwhelming, the silver nitrate traces upon his hands, the spermaceti order bearing his signature, the watermarked paper fragments matching his personal stationery. The boy was wrongfully held, and the record shall reflect it clearly." The liberation of innocence. Owen Ledger's restoration. Our return to Clerkenwell found Owen Ledger restored to his master's workshop, though the young man's demeanour bore the unmistakable marks of his ordeal. He moved among the silent timepieces with reverent care, his skilled hands beginning the delicate process of restoration that would return each mechanism to its natural rhythm. The tentative tick of the first revived clock, growing stronger as others joined its mechanical chorus, provided a peculiarly satisfying counterpoint to the morning's revelations. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Ledger greeted us with evident emotion. "Inspector Lestrade has explained something of what transpired, though I confess the full scope of Sir John's deception remains beyond my comprehension. That a gentleman of such position should orchestrate murders for the theft of instruments, it challenges everything I believed about honor and public service." Holmes observed the apprentice's work with approval, noting the careful precision with which he approached each chronometric restoration. "Your master's workshop bears testimony to a lifetime of honest craftsmanship, Mr. Ledger. These instruments, silenced through criminal artifice, now resume their proper function under your skilled attention. There is justice in such restoration, a return to natural order after the disruption of elaborate deception." The bag of Swiss instruments that had seemed so damning during the investigation now revealed its innocent origins. Mrs. Carmichael, Ledger's landlady, produced her account book showing cheese and porter purchased the evening Mr. Pendry had presented the tools, a celebration of advancement overlooked in the rush to find evidence of guilt. Holmes's complete revelation, the architecture of deception, settling into the familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings that evening. Holmes began his systematic exposition of the case that had challenged even his formidable analytical powers. The evidence lay arranged before him, with scientific precision, the microscopic paper fragments, the chemical samples, the technical diagrams that had revealed Sir John's sophisticated methods. "The initial perplexity, Watson," Holmes began, his pipe casting aromatic clouds into the gaslit atmosphere, lay in the apparent impossibility of the crimes. Locked rooms, synchronized mechanical failure, cryptic messages, these elements were designed not merely to baffle investigation, but to direct it toward predetermined conclusions. Sir John's greatest achievement was not the murders themselves, but the systematic misdirection that followed. Holmes lifted one of the glacé paper fragments, examining it through his lens with the reverence of a scholar studying ancient manuscripts. Consider the stopped clocks, Watson. To achieve such precision across diverse mechanisms required not brute force but surgical understanding of chronometric principles. Each timepiece demanded individual attention, the insertion of these precisely cut fragments at exactly the correct points to interrupt operation without permanent damage. The materials themselves told the story. Admiralty stationery of exceptional quality, cut with instruments of surgical precision, positioned by hands trained in the most delicate mechanical work. "But the timing, Holmes," I interjected, "the identical moment displayed by every clock. 13 minutes past 4. How did you connect this to Sir John's maritime knowledge?" "Ah, Watson, there lay the criminal's true signature, hidden in plain sight. 13 minutes past 4 was not arbitrary, but astronomically precise, exactly 1 hour before nautical dawn at Portsmouth on the night of Pendry's murder. The cryptic messages, 'hour before dawn and Times River flows to sea,' were not theatrical flourishes, but navigational references that only someone intimately familiar with maritime calculations would employ. Sir John thought in terms of tides and celestial observations, coordinating his crimes with the precision of a naval operation. Holmes then revealed the sophisticated chemical methods that had enabled the murders. The bitter almond scent that troubled me at both locations spoke of hydrogen cyanide, a poison requiring laboratory-grade materials and scientific knowledge to employ effectively. Sir John's position at the Admiralty provided access to such compounds and the expertise to use them with lethal precision. Pendry and Holroyd were rendered unconscious by carefully calculated doses before the theatrical ligatures were applied to mislead subsequent investigation. The institutional response: damage and control. The afternoon brought Commander Harrington, Sir John's replacement at the Admiralty, whose mission extended beyond recovering stolen property to limiting institutional damage. His bearing suggested both naval efficiency and diplomatic necessity as he addressed the delicate implications of the case. "The Admiralty wishes to express its gratitude, Mr. Holmes," Commander Harrington began with crisp authority, "though the full scope of this affair must remain within appropriate channels. Sir John's betrayal has revealed vulnerabilities in our security procedures that require careful addressing without compromising ongoing operations." Holmes received this official recognition with characteristic reserve. "The resolution of criminal cases requires attention to evidence rather than diplomatic considerations, Commander. Sir John's methods revealed sophistication that approached artistry, the simultaneous coordination of murder, theft, and misdirection executed with theatrical precision. Such capabilities, properly directed, might have served the Crown for decades. Instead, they became instruments of betrayal. The recovered correspondence revealed connections to continental buyers whose identities remained diplomatically obscure, but whose willingness to pay substantial sums for British naval innovations was well documented. The Bell Brothers Wharf had served as a conduit for instruments that would ultimately reach foreign naval establishments, providing strategic advantages that could affect the balance of maritime power. The technical resolution: precision restored. The recovery of the Meridian Mark IV chronometer from a coal barrow with false bottom in Rotherhithe provided the final satisfaction of justice properly served. Holmes examined the instrument with the reverence due to such mechanical artistry, its self-regulating mechanism representing revolution in maritime navigation that could provide strategic advantages of incalculable value. "The irony, Watson," Holmes observed, studying the chronometer's intricate mechanism, lies in the fact that Sir John's elaborate crimes ultimately served British interests. His arrest prevented the technology from reaching foreign hands, while demonstrating to potential adversaries the futility of attempting to subvert our most trusted institutions. Young Wiggins appeared with his final report, confirming the scope of Sir John's preparations. The network of continental contacts, the careful timing of shipments, the coordination between theft and transportation, all had been orchestrated with the precision that marked exceptional criminal intelligence properly applied to treasonous purposes. The restoration of natural order. Time resumes its course. Our final visit to Joshua Pendry's workshop found Owen Ledger successfully completing the restoration of his master's timepieces. The sound of synchronized ticking, each clock maintaining its individual rhythm while contributing to the workshop's mechanical symphony, provided eloquent testimony to the triumph of natural order over artificial manipulation. "Mr. Pendry would be pleased," Ledger observed with quiet satisfaction, adjusting the pendulum of the great long-case regulator that had served as Constable Withers's nightly reference. Each instrument maintains its proper function, marking time with the precision that honest craftsmanship demands. Holmes watched the apprentice's work with approval, noting the careful attention to detail that characterized true mechanical artistry. "Your master's legacy lives on in your skilled hands, Mr. Ledger. The instruments that were silenced through criminal artifice now resume their appointed purpose under your careful restoration." The workshop's renewed vitality provided fitting conclusion to a case that had challenged the very foundations of trust and authority. Where elaborate deception had once transformed honest craftsmanship into theatrical staging for murder, the simple dedication to mechanical precision now restored the natural order that both timepieces and human society were meant to serve. Watson's final reflection, the measure of justice. As we departed Clerkenwell for the final time, the sound of restored clockwork following us into the fog-shrouded street, I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary complexity of the case that had tested even Holmes's formidable analytical capabilities. The theatrical staging, the chemical sophistication, the systematic misdirection toward innocent suspects, all had been orchestrated by a mind whose technical expertise was matched by profound corruption of the very qualities that had made him valuable to legitimate service. "Holmes," I said as our hansom navigated London's ancient thoroughfares toward Baker Street, "this affair has demonstrated the extent to which exceptional intelligence can be perverted to criminal purposes. Sir John's capabilities, properly applied, might have served the Crown for decades. Instead, they became instruments of betrayal and murder." Holmes's response carried the philosophical weight of one who had witnessed both the heights and depths of human capability. "It is not genius that alarms me, Watson, but probity without imagination that keeps the world intact. Pendry had it. Holroyd, too. They did not pretend the world to be other than it was. Sir John imagined so brilliantly that he excused himself from ordinary bonds. Once a man places himself above his own law, no other holds him." The stopped clocks of Clerkenwell had finally resumed their steady tick, marking the passage of time with mechanical precision that neither human corruption nor criminal artifice could permanently disrupt. Yet the case of the hour before dawn had demonstrated that the greatest threats to social order often arose not from the criminal classes, but from the corruption of those entrusted with its protection. As London's fog settled once again over the city's ancient streets, Holmes sat in contemplative silence before our fire, his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The Thames ran silent beneath the city's bridges, but its waters had finally yielded the secrets that had challenged the very foundations of trust and authority upon which civilized society depended. Time, as Joshua Pendry had understood, possessed its own inexorable justice, one that neither theatrical staging nor chemical sophistication could ultimately defeat. The hour before dawn had brought murder to London, but it had also brought the recognition that systematic analysis and logical deduction, properly applied, could penetrate even the most sophisticated deceptions and restore the natural order that both mechanical precision and human integrity were meant to serve. Holmes raised the great regulator's glass and made the smallest of adjustments. Its beat steadied, and the pendulum's bright tongue seemed to resume a conversation only briefly interrupted. "For Mr. Joshua Pendry," Holmes said softly, closing the case. "Timekeeper." The day, which belongs to honest labor, was again at hand. In the days that followed Sir John Rooke's arrest, a curious transformation settled upon London, not the dramatic revelation that sensational journalism might demand, but the quiet, methodical restoration of institutional order that marks the resolution of affairs too delicate for public consumption. The newspapers, which had blazoned forth the early mysteries with characteristic relish, now spoke in studied euphemisms of administrative reorganization and personnel adjustments within technical departments. It was not for me to lift the veil more than propriety allowed. Suffice it that the necessary evidence found the necessary hands, and that justice, of that particular, measured sort which moves without fanfare through the corridors of power, took its appointed course. Holmes observed these institutional maneuvers with characteristic detachment, his attention focused not upon public consequence, but upon the exactitude of resolution. The December morning found him in that state of contemplative satisfaction that invariably followed his most challenging investigations, seated before our fire with the violin resting across his knees and his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames with philosophical contentment. "The machinery of state, Watson," he observed, his voice carrying that quiet authority that marked his most significant deductions, "operates with a precision that rivals the finest chronometric instruments. Sir John's removal has been accomplished with the same efficiency that marked his crimes, swift, silent, and leaving no visible disruption upon the surface of official business. The restoration of honor, justice in its proper form. Inspector Lestrade's arrival that afternoon brought with it the formal resolution that both duty and friendship demanded. He placed upon Holmes's table a small square box, clearing his throat with that mixture of stiffness and sincerity which, in him, marked an unaccustomed compliment. "From the Yard," he said with characteristic directness, "for services rendered in a matter that will never quite find its way into the public prints. There's gratitude in it, Mr. Holmes, though it's not the sort that gets framed upon the wall." Holmes lifted the lid to reveal, upon a bed of cotton, the brass ferrule we had discovered at the crime scene, newly polished, yet bearing still the twin nicks that had first suggested the presence of our mysterious gentleman in the greatcoat. Holmes's lips curved in that rare expression of amusement which I had learned to treasure. "An emblem of misdirection, Lestrade," he observed, turning the small object in his long fingers, "and a reminder that nothing is so treacherous as the obvious. You will ensure that the substantial credit falls where it is due." Lestrade's expression grew firm with professional resolve. "Young Ledger goes free with a clear record. The boy was wrongfully held, and the files will reflect it properly. As for the rest, well, we have our ways of ensuring justice serves truth rather than convenience." Commander Harrington's subsequent visit provided the technical closure that the case's complexity demanded. The recovered Meridian Mark IV chronometer, he informed us, had been secured under safeguards more formidable than any that had protected it initially. More significantly, Sir John's technical modifications, despite their corrupt origins, represented genuine advances that would benefit British chronometric science for decades to come. A paradox worthy of philosophical consideration, Holmes observed after the commander's departure. The same exceptional capabilities that enabled Sir John's betrayal also produced innovations that serve legitimate purposes. Can we separate the value of discovery from the corruption of its source? Should we? The workshop restored. Time resumes its natural rhythm. Our final visit to Joshua Pendry's establishment in Red Lion Court provided the most satisfying resolution of all. Owen Ledger, now established as proprietor of the chronometer workshop, had successfully restored each timepiece to its proper function. The sound of synchronized ticking, each clock maintaining its individual rhythm while contributing to the workshop's mechanical symphony, provided eloquent testimony to the triumph of honest craftsmanship over criminal artifice. "Mr. Pendry would be pleased," Ledger observed with quiet satisfaction, adjusting the pendulum of the great long case regulator that had served as Constable Withers's nightly reference. "Each instrument maintains its proper function, marking time with the precision that honest labor demands." Mrs. Carmichael's discovery among Mr. Pendry's papers of a witnessed bequest of tools to his apprentice had resolved the final question surrounding the Swiss instruments that had once seemed so damning. The subscription from grateful neighbors and clients ensured that the chronometer lamps would continue to burn in Red Lion Court, maintaining the tradition of precision that Sir John's theatrical deceptions had sought to exploit. Holmes watched the apprentice's work with approval, noting the careful attention to detail that characterized true mechanical artistry. "Your master's legacy lives on in your skilled hands, Mr. Ledger. The instruments that were silenced through criminal artifice now resume their appointed purpose under your careful restoration." Holmes's philosophical resolution. The nature of time and truth. That evening, as London's winter fog settled once again over the city's ancient thoroughfares, Holmes sat in contemplative silence before our fire, his sharp features etched by the gaslight that had witnessed so many of our investigations. The evidence of our triumph lay properly catalogued and filed, yet the case had clearly left deeper impressions than mere professional satisfaction. "Consider the nature of time itself, Watson," Holmes said, drawing his bow across the violin strings to produce a single, pure note that seemed to hang in our sitting room's quiet air. Pendry, the honest craftsman, saw it as a sacred trust, a precise measure of cosmic order that demanded faithful service. Sir John saw it as a malleable instrument, a tool for strategic advantage to be manipulated, even halted, for his own purposes. Holmes paused, his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames with philosophical depth. "Time is merely a medium, like water. It takes the shape into which men pour it. Pendry poured his life into keeping it true. Sir John attempted to dam and divert it for private ends. In the end, the current resumes its natural course. The clocks go on." I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary complexity of the case that had challenged even Holmes's formidable analytical powers. "The corruption of exceptional intelligence troubles me deeply, Holmes. Sir John possessed capabilities that, properly applied, might have advanced British science by decades. Instead, they became instruments of betrayal that challenged the very foundations of institutional trust." "Capacity is not character, Watson," Holmes replied with quiet authority. "The same faculty that adjusts an escapement to perfection may still an artery with calculated precision, or silence a conscience with sophisticated rationalization." Sir John imagined himself exempt from ordinary moral law by virtue of serving extraordinary purposes. There is no immunity to that infection, but humility, and I have observed that humility is rarely issued with a commission. The eternal game. When one mystery yields to another. Our philosophical reflections were interrupted by Mrs. Hudson's arrival with a card upon her tray. Holmes glanced at it, and I observed that familiar spark of interest kindle in his grey eyes. "Ah, the Marchioness of Hatherley, no less," he announced with renewed energy, "and she arrives with a problem sufficiently urgent to bring her personally rather than through intermediaries." "Another chronometer?" I ventured, noting the transformation that always marked Holmes's engagement with fresh mystery. "Emeralds, if I read the handwriting correctly," he replied, flicking the card into the air and catching it with languid precision. "Observe the pressure in the downstrokes, the minute tremor at the terminals, a woman of spirit under considerable strain." We are to have our work, Watson." He rose with characteristic decisiveness, and the violin bow, neglected, slid to the carpet. For a moment he paused, a curious gentleness tempering his usual sardonic humor. "I shall be reproached," he said quietly, "for bringing a man of the Admiralty to ruin." "You brought a murderer to justice," I returned with conviction. "The terms fall differently on different ledgers," he replied, and there was the faintest weariness in the word. Then he straightened, and the keen light of intellectual challenge returned to illuminate his sharp features. "Come then. If the world must contain both emeralds and chronometers, we shall endeavor to see that each remains in the proper hands at the proper hour." Watson's final reflection: the measure of civilization. As we prepared to receive our new client, I cast one backward glance at the small brass ferrule and, beside it, the jeweler's loop which Owen Ledger had sent with a note. "For the gentleman who taught me that the eye must be as honest as the hand." Holmes observed the gesture and shrugged it away with characteristic dismissal. "Trifles," he said, though his tone suggested deeper appreciation. "The satisfaction lies not in souvenirs, but in sequence. If this affair has taught us anything, Watson, it is that the apparent simultaneity of many things is often a contrivance. One must find the hidden wedges, remove them with precision, and then, tick-tock, truth resumes its natural rhythm." The hour before dawn had brought murder, deception, and theatrical staging to London's fog-shrouded streets, challenging the very mechanisms by which we order our world. Yet it had also demonstrated that systematic analysis and logical deduction, properly applied, could penetrate even the most sophisticated deceptions and restore the natural order upon which both mechanical precision and civilized society depended. Holmes opened the door with that slightly ironic bow which was his tribute to social convention, and I took up my pen to record, as best I could, the measure of a case in which time itself had become an instrument of both deception and ultimate justice. Others would follow in their train, as they always did. Yet when, in some quiet interval, I hear the measured tick of a regulator or the delicate chatter of a carriage clock, I'm transported in memory to a silent workshop in Clerkenwell, to a fog-bound counting-house upon the Thames, and to the singular friend whose genius made both time and tide instruments of truth. Thus ended the affair which I have chronicled as the hour before dawn, a testament to the eternal struggle between order and chaos, truth and deception, the honest measurement of time and the theatrical manipulation of appearances that marks the difference between civilization and its most sophisticated enemies. The game, as Holmes had observed, was eternally afoot. Time's own rhythm ensuring that neither criminal genius nor institutional corruption could permanently disrupt the natural order that logical deduction was meant to serve and protect.